The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest room in the known universe. Its ceiling stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed inside it. 12 species sat in their floating chairs, arranged in a circle that was supposed to represent equality. But everyone knew the truth. Some chairs floated higher than others, and the human chair was always at the bottom. Unipark walked to the center of the hall. She was a small woman with tired eyes and gray hair that she kept tied back in a simple knot. She had been the human ambassador for 20 years. Before that, she had been a soldier. Before that, refugee from a war that humans had fought to protect species who could not even remember the name of the conflict. Behind her, a holographic screen showed images that made some of the council members look away. Dead human soldiers, burned human ships, destroyed human colonies. The Rim War had lasted 18 months. Humans had held the line against the Vorax swarm while the council argued about whether to send supplies. By the time help arrived, 200,000 humans were dead. "We are here today," Una said, her voice steady, to make a simple request. Elder Tareem of the Velith leaned forward in his floating chair. His skin was pale blue, almost white, and his eyes had no pupils. The Velith were one of the oldest species in the galaxy. They had been flying between stars when humans were still living in caves. "Speak human," Tareem said. His voice was kind, the way an adult might speak to a child who did not understand the world yet. Una felt something twist in her chest. She had heard that voice her entire life. Every human had. It was the voice of patience without respect. The voice that said, "We tolerate you, but we do not see you as equals." "Humanity requests full membership status," she said. "We want equal voting rights. We want recognition of our contributions to this council and to galactic civilization." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the laughter began. It started with the Solari, a species known for their art and their cruelty. Their representative, a thin creature with silver skin, covered his mouth with one hand and shook with quiet amusement. Then the Morith joined in, their deep voices rumbling like distant thunder. Even Kessa, the Morith representative who had once called Una a friend, was smiling. Only the Vorak remained silent. Their insectoid faces showed no expression. But their representatives stared at Una with something that might have been curiosity. Elder Torium raised one hand, and the laughter slowly died. "Ambassador Park," he said gently, "humanity is a young species. You have only been part of this council for 300 years. In galactic terms, you are children. Perhaps in another millennium, when your people have matured, we can discuss this again." Una looked around the room. She saw the faces of species that humanity had saved, fed, healed, and protected. She thought about Captain Do-Yan Lee, who had crashed his ship into a Vorak command vessel to save the Velith homeworld. His body had never been recovered. The Velith had not even sent a message of thanks. She thought about Dr. Mingy Beek, who had spent 30 years developing a cure for the Blight, a disease that was killing 3 species. Millions of lives saved. The council had given her a small certificate and a note that misspelled her name. She thought about engineer Tajan Cho, who had designed the shield systems that protected every council station, every trade route, every colony. He had died last year alone in a small apartment, forgotten by everyone except other humans. 300 years of service, 300 years of sacrifice. And in return, humanity got the smallest chair at the table and the kind laughter of species who saw them as useful pets. "I understand," Una said. Her voice did not shake. Her hands did not tremble. She had practiced this moment in her mind for months. "Then I must inform the council that humanity formally withdraws its petition." Tareem nodded, looking relieved. A wise decision. Perhaps in time and its membership, Una continued, the words fell like stones into still water. The smiles disappeared. The floating chairs stopped moving. "I'm sorry," Tareem said. "Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council," Una said. "Effective immediately. All human personnel will be recalled from council space within 6 months. All human technology will be removed or disabled. All human treaties and agreements are hereby cancelled." She turned and began walking toward the exit. "You cannot do this," Torim said. His voice was no longer kind. "You cannot simply leave. You have obligations, responsibilities." Yuna stopped, but did not turn around. "For 300 years, we have met every obligation," she said. "We have fulfilled every responsibility. We have given you our blood, our labor, our genius, and our lives. And in return, you have given us laughter and small chairs." She finally turned to face them. The 12 elder species of the galaxy, the rulers of 1,000 worlds, the masters of technologies that humans could barely understand. And for the first time in her life, Yuna did not feel small standing before them. "We do not hate you," she said. "We are not angry with you. We are simply tired. Tired of begging for respect that should have been given freely. Tired of watching our people die for species who cannot remember their names. Tired of being called children by those who would have been destroyed without our help." She bowed once, a gesture of farewell that held no warmth. "Humanity wishes the Galactic Council well. May you find the maturity you seek in the millennium to come." Then she walked out of the hall, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Behind her, the council members began to speak all at once, their voices rising in confusion and anger, and something that might have been the first faint whisper of fear, but Yuna did not hear them. She was already thinking about the future, a future where humans would no longer beg for a place at someone else's table. They would build their own table instead, and this time they would choose who got to sit at it. The council did not believe it at first. They thought the humans were bluffing. They thought it was a negotiating trick, a way to get better terms. They sent messages that were sometimes polite and sometimes threatening. They waited for humanity to come back to the table and apologize. But the humans did not come back. They just started leaving. Jiho Kong had worked on the Velith mining colony of Seraphor for 12 years. He was an engineer, not a famous one, just a man who was good at fixing things. Every morning, he woke up before the alien sun rose and walked to the atmospheric processing station. The machines there turned the thin, poisonous air of Seraphor into something the Velith workers could breathe. Without those machines, the colony would die in hours. Jiho had built most of those machines himself. He had improved the designs that other humans had created before him. He had trained the local workers to help with simple repairs. But the complicated work, the work that required true understanding, that had always fallen to him. Now he was packing his bags. Overseer Delith stood in the doorway of Jiho's small room. Watching him fold his clothes into a worn travel case, Delith was a tall Velith with 4 arms and pale blue skin that had turned almost gray with age. He had worked with Jiho for 8 years. They were not friends exactly, but they had shared meals together. They had laughed at the same jokes. Jiho had once saved Ali's life when a power surge nearly killed him. "You cannot leave," Delith said. His 4 hands moved nervously, opening and closing. "The processors. Who will maintain them?" "I left all the documentation," Jiho said. He did not look up from his packing. "Everything is written down. Your engineers should be able to follow the instructions. Our engineers do not understand human technology." Jiho stopped packing. He stood there for a moment, his hands resting on his travel case, his eyes closed. Delphi said quietly, "I have offered to train your engineers for 12 years. Every year I sent a request to the colonial administration. Every year they told me it was not necessary. They said humans would always be here to fix things." Delith's pale face became even paler. "I am sorry," Jiho said, and he meant it. He did not hate Delith. He did not hate the Velith. He was just tired. So very tired of giving everything to people who expected his service but never valued his presence. He picked up his bag and walked past Dalith, heading for the landing pad where a human shuttle was waiting. "Where will you go?" Delith called after him. "Home," Jiho said without turning around. He did not say which home. Earth was just a name to him. He had never been there. But for the first time in his life, he wanted to see it, all across the galaxy. The same scene was happening again and again. On the Morith homeworld, Dr. Sujino closed her medical clinic after 30 years of service. She had trained generations of Moreth doctors, but she had never been allowed to hold a senior position in their medical council. She was too young, they said. Her species was too new. Perhaps in a few more centuries, she left behind cabinets full of medicines that only she knew how to make. She left behind equipment that only she knew how to repair. She left behind patients who had trusted her with their lives, but had never thought to ask what her life was like. On the great trade station of Nexus Prime, Captain Yunjiru handed over control of the security forces to a Solari officer who had never commanded anything larger than a patrol ship. For 80 years, human peacekeepers had kept Nexus Prime safe. Now, they boarded their transports and flew away, leaving behind a station that suddenly felt very big and very empty in the diplomatic quarter of the Council homeworld. Human translators packed their personal belongings and erased their access codes. Most species spoke their own languages and relied on translation technology to communicate. That technology had been maintained by a human woman named Yunbi Huang for the past 100 years. She had done the work quietly, thanklessly, fixing bugs and adding new languages in her spare time. No one had ever thanked her. No one had ever noticed. Now, she was gone, and no one knew the passwords to her systems. The Council sent official demands. They reminded humanity of treaties and obligations and the terrible consequences of breaking galactic law. The messages were ignored. The Council sent diplomats to the human border, where they were greeted by silent ships that refused to answer any communication. Elder Tareem called an emergency meeting. "This is unacceptable," he declared. His calm voice had become sharp with frustration. "They cannot simply abandon their posts. They have duties, contracts, responsibilities." "What would you have us do?" asked Kessa of the Morith. Her voice was careful, hiding the fear that was growing in her chest. "Our food production systems are already showing strain. Human agricultural scientists designed them. We do not know how they work. The atmospheric shields on 3 of our colony worlds are failing," reported the Valeth Minister of Colonial Affairs. "Human engineers built them. We do not have the knowledge to repair them. Our translation networks are becoming unstable," added the Solari representative. "Diplomatic communications are breaking down."
Oh.
The room fell silent. The 12 elder species, the rulers of the galaxy, sat in their floating chairs and looked at each other. For the first time in centuries, they felt something they had almost forgotten. Fear, not of war, not of invasion, but of something far simpler and far more terrible. They had become dependent on a species they had never respected. They had built their civilization on the backs of humans they considered inferior, and now those humans were walking away, taking their knowledge and their skills and their endless patience with them. "They will come back," Elder Tareem said, but his voice was not certain anymore. "They need us." Where else would they go? No one answered, because deep down, they all knew the truth. Humanity did not need the Council. The Council had just never bothered to notice. 8 months after the humans left, the first disaster struck. The Morith Food Synthesis Network was a wonder of technology. It turned simple minerals and water into enough food to feed billions. The machines worked day and night, producing grains and vegetables and protein that kept the Morith civilization alive. The network had been designed by human scientists 40 years ago. It had worked perfectly ever since. Now it was breaking down. Sessa stood in the control room of the main synthesis plant on the Morith homeworld. Alarms were flashing everywhere. Engineers ran back and forth, shouting at each other in voices filled with panic. On the screens, numbers were falling. Food production had dropped by 30% in the last week. By the end of the month, it would drop by half. "What is the problem?" Kessa demanded. "Why can we not fix it?" The chief engineer, an old Morith named Borith, spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "The core systems are encrypted. The human scientists who designed them used a coding language we do not understand. We cannot access the repair functions, then break the encryption. We have tried. Our best programmers have been working on it for months. They estimate it will take another 50 years to decode." 50 years. In 50 years, half the Morith population would be dead from starvation. Kessa turned and walked out of the control room. She moved through the corridors of the plant, past workers who looked at her with hope in their eyes. She was their representative. She was supposed to protect them. She was supposed to have answers. She had nothing. That night, she recorded a message and sent it to the human border. She begged. She pleaded. She offered trade agreements and apologies and anything else she could think of. She sent the message into the darkness and waited. 3 days later, she received a reply. It was a single line of text, transmitted from a human ship that had appeared briefly at the border before disappearing again. Your request has been received. Humanity wishes the Morath people well. No help came. On the Velith homeworld. The problems were different, but just as deadly. The great atmospheric shields had protected the planet for 2 centuries. The Velith sun was old and unstable, prone to bursts of radiation that would kill any unprotected life. The shields absorbed that radiation and turned it into harmless light. The shields had been designed by a human engineer named Taijan Cho. He had built them when he was young. He had maintained them for his entire life. He had died last year. No one had thought to learn his secrets. Now the shields were failing. Governor Celis watched from his office as another radiation storm swept across the northern continent. The shields flickered and held, but barely. Warning lights covered his desk like angry red eyes. His scientists told him they had maybe 2 years before the shields failed completely. Maybe less. Can we rebuild them? He asked. Possibly, said his chief scientist. A young Velith who had never met a human in his life. If we had the original blueprints, if we understood the power distribution systems, if we knew how the fail-safe mechanisms worked, but we do not have any of those things. The human engineer kept most of his knowledge in his head. He offered to train our people, but we always said there was no rush. No rush. Governor Celis wanted to laugh. They had thought they had forever. They had thought the humans would always be there. Quietly fixing things, quietly keeping them alive, across the galaxy. Similar stories were unfolding. The Great Wormhole Network, which allowed ships to travel between distant stars in minutes instead of years, began to show problems. The stabilization systems required constant adjustment. Human technicians had done that work for generations. Now, without them, the wormholes were becoming unpredictable. Ships entered at one location and exited somewhere completely different. 3 vessels were lost in a single week. Trade routes became dangerous. Pirate fleets, which had been kept in check by human patrol ships, now roamed freely. Merchant vessels refused to fly without military escorts, and the military was stretched too thin to protect everyone. Diseases that human doctors had cured began to return. The medicines ran out. The equipment broke down. Species that had not worried about healthcare in centuries suddenly found themselves building hospitals with no idea how to staff them, and through it all, the translation networks continued to fail. Diplomatic conferences became shouting matches as species literally could not understand each other. Trade negotiations collapsed. Military alliances fell apart. The Council, which had governed the galaxy for 10,000 years, could barely hold a meeting without someone storming out in frustration. Elder Torim called another emergency session. This time, the floating chairs were arranged in a tight circle. There was no pretense of hierarchy anymore. They were all equally desperate. We must force the humans to return, Torim said. His voice was tired. He looked older than he had 8 months ago. This is not a request anymore. This is a matter of survival. Force them how? Asked the Vorak representative. His insectoid eyes reflected the dim lights of the chamber. Our military analysts have studied the human forces. They estimate that a direct conflict would result in unacceptable losses. For us or for them? For us, the room fell silent. The species that had laughed at humanity, that had called them children, that had given them the smallest chair at the table, now had to face an uncomfortable truth. For 300 years, humans had fought their wars. The Council had never developed their own military strength. Why would they, when the humans were so willing to die for them? Now those same humans had built a fleet that could destroy the Council if it wanted to. They had taken everything they learned from fighting the galaxy's wars and turned it into a weapon that no one else could match. Then we must negotiate, Kessa said. Her voice was quiet, ashamed. We must give them what they wanted. Full membership. Equal rights. Whatever they ask for. And if they refuse, no one answered. Because no one wanted to say what they were all thinking. If the humans refused, the galaxy would fall apart, and there was nothing any of them could do to stop it. Admiral Haejun Yoon stood on the observation deck of the New Sol, the greatest warship humanity had ever built. Through the massive windows, could see the stars stretching out in every direction, beautiful, peaceful. He was 63 years old. His hair had turned gray years ago, and his face was lined with the marks of a hard life. He had joined the fleet when he was 20, a young man eager to serve, to prove that humanity was worthy of respect. He had spent 40 years fighting battles for the Council. He had watched friends die. He had killed enemies who had never done anything to harm humanity. He had followed orders, even when those orders made no sense. Now, for the first time in his life, he answered only 2 other humans. Behind him, the door opened. Lieutenant Da Shin walked in, carrying a data tablet. She was young, only 25. Part of the first generation of humans who would never know what it felt like to bow to the Council. Hajan envied her that freedom. Sir, she said, we have received new transmissions from Council space. A lot of them. Hajan did not turn from the window. Summarize. Formal apologies from the Velith government. They are offering to build monuments to human soldiers who died in Council wars. They want to rename their military academy after Captain Doyan Lee, the man whose ship they let die without backup. Yes, sir. Haejun almost smiled. Almost. What else? The Maroth are offering full trade rights, complete access to their markets. They say they will buy human goods at any price we name. Yes. Their food network is failing. They need our agricultural technology. Yes, sir. There is also a message from the Solari. They want to fund a human cultural center on their homeworld. They say they want to learn about human art and history and traditions. The same Solari who called our music primitive noise and our art the scribbles of children. Daj's face remained neutral, but Haejun could see the anger in her eyes. She was too young to remember the insults personally, but every human child grew up learning about them. The jokes, the dismissals, the 1,000 small cruelties that had been dressed up as friendly advice. There is one more message, she said, personal, from Elder Torium himself. Hadun finally turned from the window. Read it. Dog cleared her throat and looked at the tablet. Ambassador Yoon. I will not call you Admiral because I wish to address you as an equal, not as a military opponent. I am writing to you directly because I believe official channels have failed. We did not understand. For 300 years, we had humanity at our side, and we did not see what we had. We took your kindness for weakness. We took your service for obligation. We took your patience for proof that you were lesser beings who did not deserve respect. We were wrong. We see now what we have lost. We see the darkness spreading across our worlds. We see our children asking why the lights are failing, why the food is running out, why the sky is falling, and we have no answers. I am not asking you to forgive us. I am not sure we deserve forgiveness, but I am asking you to come back, not as servants, not as children to be tolerated, as partners, as equals, as the species we should have recognized from the beginning. Please, the galaxy needs you. We need you. Yours in humility, Elder Torium of the Velith. Da lowered the tablet. The observation deck was silent, except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. Haejun walked to his private desk and sat down heavily. He thought about his grandmother, a nurse who had served on a Morath medical station for 50 years. She had saved thousands of lives. She had never been allowed to attend staff meetings because humans were not considered senior enough. She had died in her sleep, far from home, without ever receiving a single award or recognition. He thought about his father, a diplomat who had spent his entire career being politely ignored. His father had believed, truly believed, that if humanity just worked harder, just prove themselves a little more. The council would eventually accept them. He had died still believing that. Still hoping, he thought about his own life. The battles he had fought, the friends he had buried, the medals he had earned that meant nothing to anyone except other humans. 40 years of service, 40 years of sacrifice. And the best the council could offer was a letter that said sorry. Sorry was not enough. Lieutenant, he said finally, draft a response. Yes, sir. What should it say? Hagen looked at the stars again. He thought about all the humans out there, on all the worlds they were building for themselves. Scientists working without restrictions. Artists creating without being mocked. Children growing up without being told they were inferior. For the first time in 300 years, humanity was free. Really free. Not free because someone allowed them to be, but free because they had chosen to be. Going back would mean giving that up. It would mean returning to the table where they had always been given the smallest chair. It would mean trusting species who had proven again and again that they could not be trusted. The council was suffering. Hajan knew that. He felt sorrow for the innocent people who were caught in the middle, ordinary citizens who had never personally harmed any human. They did not deserve to suffer for the crimes of their leaders, but his own people had suffered for 300 years. They had suffered in silence. They had suffered with dignity. They had suffered while the galaxy laughed at them. It was not humanity's job to save the council anymore. Tell them, Hagen said, that we wish them well. Dai typed the message. 3 words. The same 3 words that Kessa had received when she begged for help. The same 3 words that every council species would receive. When they came crawling to the human border, we wish you well. It was not cruelty. It was not revenge. It was simply the truth. Humanity wished them well. Humanity hoped they would find a way to survive. But humanity was not coming back. Not now. Not ever. The observation deck was silent again. Outside, the stars continued to shine. And somewhere in the darkness, the Galactic Council was finally beginning to understand what they had lost. 10 years passed. The galaxy became a different place. The Galactic Council, which had ruled 1,000 worlds for 10,000 years, no longer existed. It had broken apart slowly, like ice melting in warm water. First, the Vorak withdrew, blaming the Velith for driving humanity away. Then the Solari left, claiming they could manage their own affairs better alone. One by one, the Great Alliance fell apart until nothing remained except angry species fighting over the pieces. Border wars became common. Trade routes collapsed. The great projects that had once united the galaxy, the wormhole network, the universal medical database, the shared defense systems, fell into disrepair. Each species retreated to their own territory, struggling to maintain technologies they had never bothered to understand. Meanwhile, humanity built something new. The human territories now covered 200 star systems. They stretched across a vast region of space that the Council had once considered worthless. Too far from the center. Too hard to reach. Too empty to matter. The humans had taken those empty worlds and turned them into gardens. President Una Park, the same woman who had walked out of the council chamber 10 years ago, stood on a platform on Earth's moon. Before her rose the monument to the returned. It was made of white stone that glowed softly in the sunlight, and its walls were covered with names. Thousands of names. Millions of names. Every human who had ever served the council, from the first ambassadors to the last engineers, was recorded here. A crowd had gathered for the 10th anniversary of the withdrawal. Old soldiers in clean uniforms. Young children who had never known any life except freedom. Scientists and artists and workers and dreamers, and scattered among them. A few aliens, members of species who had chosen to leave the council and join humanity instead. Beside Una stood Admiral Hajon Yoon. His hair was completely white, but his eyes were still sharp. He had spent the last 5 years teaching at the new military academy, training the next generation of human officers. Not to fight wars for others, but to defend their own people. Dr. Minji Beek was there too. Her research had doubled the human lifespan. Humans now lived, on average, to 200 years. They had time to learn and grow and create in ways that previous generations had only dreamed of. And there was young Jihokong, the engineer who had left Seraphor 10 years ago. He was not young anymore. His hair had streaks of gray, but he smiled more easily now. He had spent the last decade designing atmospheric processors for human colony worlds. Real colony worlds on planets that belonged to humanity. No one laughed at his work. No one called him a child. He was respected. He was valued. Yuna stepped forward to speak. Her voice was carried across the moon's surface by invisible speakers and transmitted to every human world in real time. 10 years ago, she said, we made a choice. We chose to stop begging for respect and start demanding it. We chose to stop serving masters who did not value us and start building a future for ourselves. We chose to love ourselves enough to walk away from those who did not love us back. She paused, looking out at the crowd. She saw tears on some faces, pride on others. And on the faces of the alien defectors, she saw something like hope. It was not easy, she continued. We lost much. We gave up the security of belonging to something larger than ourselves. We gave up the comfort of being part of a galactic community. But we gained something more valuable. We gained our dignity. We gained our freedom. We gained the right to be judged by our own standards, not by the standards of those who refused to see our worth. In the ruins of the council chamber, Elder Tareem watched the broadcast on a small screen. He was old now, ancient by Velith standards. His blue skin had faded to almost white. His forearms trembled with age. He knew he would not live much longer. Around him, the great hall was empty. The floating chairs had long since fallen and been removed. The ceiling, which had once held artificial clouds, was cracked and leaking. The glory of the council was a memory, and not a pleasant one. We had them, Torium whispered to no one. We had the best of them, and we threw them away. He thought about all the things he wished he had done differently. All the times he could have spoken up, could have demanded that humanity be treated fairly. But he had been comfortable. He had enjoyed feeling superior. He had laughed at the humans because laughing at them made him feel important. Now his world was dying. The atmospheric shields were failing faster every year. Soon, the radiation would become too strong. His people would have to flee underground or die, and there was no one to help them. The other council species had their own problems. And the humans wished them well. On the moon, Yuna was finishing her speech. I do not hate the council, she said. I feel sorry for them. They had a chance to have partners, equals, friends. Instead, they chose to have servants. And when the servants left, they discovered that they had never learned to stand on their own. She looked up at the stars, visible even in the lunar daylight. Let their fate be a lesson. Not to them, is too late for them to learn, but to us. Let us never forget what it feels like to be dismissed. Let us never treat others the way we were treated. Let us build a civilization that values every person, every species, every voice. Not because we are better than the council, but because we can choose to be different. She raised her hand in a gesture of farewell, not to the crowd, but to the universe beyond. We are humanity. We are free. And we will never bow to anyone again. The crowd cheered. The sound echoed across the lunar surface and was carried to every human world. In hospitals and schools, in factories and farms, in ships sailing between the stars, humans heard their president's words and felt something they had not felt for 300 years. Pride, real pride. The kind that comes not from the approval of others, but from knowing deep in your heart that you are exactly who you are supposed to be. The sun rose over the monument to the returned. Its light touched the names carved into the stone, millions of names, millions of lives, millions of sacrifices that had finally been recognized, and somewhere in the dying remains of the council. And old Velith turned off his screen and closed his eyes. Humanity was free. The council's regret had come too late.